Diana pulled into the parking lot of Riverside Medical Center just as the sun was beginning to set. She turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, staring at the massive building where she'd spent the last 15 years of her life. It looked different somehow, even though nothing had actually changed. Maybe it was because for the first time in her career, she was seeing it from the outside looking in, at least for today. It was her day off, and she was dressed like a normal person for once. No crisp blazer, no professional heels, no perfectly styled hair, just her favorite jeans, a comfortable sweater, and sneakers that had seen better days. She'd pulled her hair back in a simple ponytail and hadn't bothered with much makeup. After all, she wasn't here for work. She was here to see someone who mattered more to her than any job title ever could. Dr. William Hayes had been admitted 3 days ago with heart problems. The man who'd taught her everything about medicine, who'd believed in her when she was just a nervous medical student, who'd become more like a father to her than a mentor, was now lying in a hospital bed on the 4th floor. The thought made her chest tight with worry. Diana grabbed her purse and headed toward the main entrance. The automatic doors slid open with their familiar whoosh, and she stepped into the lobby she knew so well. Everything looked the same cream-colored walls, the same information desk, the same slightly flickering fluorescent light in the corner that maintenance kept saying they'd fix. But something felt off, and it took her a moment to realize what it was. She was walking through her hospital as a visitor, not as the person in charge. 2 weeks ago, the board had announced her appointment as the new hospital administrator. It had been a whirlwind ever since. Meetings, paperwork, budget reviews, staff introductions. She'd barely had time to breathe, let alone actually walk the floors and see what was really happening. The previous administrator had left behind a mess of problems, and she was still trying to figure out where to even start. As she made her way to the elevators, she noticed a janitor struggling with a broken cleaning cart. The wheel kept getting stuck and he had to drag it across the floor. Diana made a mental note. How many other things around here were barely working? How many small problems were adding up to make everyone's job harder? The elevator arrived and she stepped inside with a young couple who looked exhausted and worried. They were probably visiting someone too. She wondered how their experience had been, whether the staff had been kind to them, whether they felt taken care of. These were things she needed to know but rarely got honest answers about in official reports. When she reached the 4th floor, the cardiac unit, she stepped out into a hallway that felt busier than it should be. Nurses rushed past with barely a glance at each other. A phone was ringing somewhere, going unanswered. An elderly man in a wheelchair sat by himself near the nurses' station, looking lost and confused. No one seemed to notice him. Diana's training kicked in automatically. She walked over to the man and knelt down to his eye level. "Are you all right? Do you need help finding someone?" He looked at her with grateful eyes. "I can't find my room. I went for a walk and now I don't remember the number." "What's your name?" she asked gently. George Patterson." Diana stood up and walked to the nurse's station where she could see the patient board. She found his name and room number quickly. "You're in room 412, George. It's just down this hallway, 3rd door on the right. Would you like me to walk with you?" "Oh, would you? That's very kind." She pushed his wheelchair down the hall, chatting with him about the weather and his grandchildren. When they reached his room, his daughter was there, frantically looking for him. The relief on her face was immediate. "Dad, I turned my back for 1 minute." "Where did you go?" "This nice lady helped me find my way back," George said, patting Diana's hand. The daughter thanked her profusely and Diana smiled and left them alone. But inside she was troubled. Why had George been left alone? Where were the staff? How long had he been wandering? As she continued toward Dr. Hayes's room, she observed everything with fresh eyes. The paint was peeling in one corner near the ceiling. A supply cart was left in the middle of the hallway, a potential hazard. The emergency exit sign was partially burned out. These weren't huge problems individually, but together they painted a picture of a place that was struggling, a place where people were too busy or too tired to notice the small things falling apart. She found room 428 and paused at the door. Through the small window she could see Dr. Hayes sleeping, his chest rising and falling steadily. The sight of him looking so frail and vulnerable made her throat tighten. This was the man who'd stood beside her through her residency, who'd talked her out of quitting medicine at least 3 times, who'd written the recommendation letter that had changed her life. Diana pushed open the door quietly and slipped inside. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of the monitors beside the bed. She pulled the visitor's chair close and sat down, careful not to make any noise that might wake him. He needed his rest. She pulled out her tablet from her purse, thinking she might catch up on some reading. There were patient satisfaction surveys she'd been meaning to review, and this seemed like a good time to do it. But as she started reading through them, the comments jumped out at her in a new way. Staff seemed overwhelmed, had to wait a long time for help. Nurses were doing their best but appeared understaffed. It was all there in black and white. People had been trying to tell the previous administration what was wrong, but had anyone really listened? Had anyone cared enough to dig deeper and find out why the staff was overwhelmed? Why they were understaffed? Why the small things weren't getting fixed? She looked up at Dr. Hayes, still sleeping peacefully, and made a silent promise. She would fix this. Not with grand gestures or fancy new programs, but by actually paying attention, by listening, by being present in a way that leadership hadn't been in a long time. The sun had fully set now, and the room grew darker. Diana didn't turn on the light. She just sat there, keeping watch over the man who'd watched over her for so many years, and thought about all the things she needed to do to make this hospital what it should be. A place where patients felt cared for, where staff felt supported, where the small things didn't fall through the cracks because everyone was too busy just trying to survive the day. She had no idea that in about 15 minutes, her quiet evening visit was about to turn into something that would change everything. Sometimes the best lessons come from the most unexpected places, and Diana was about to learn more about her hospital in the next hour than she had in all the official meetings and reports combined. Diana had been sitting with Dr. Hayes for about 40 minutes when she heard footsteps approaching in the hallway. They were quick, purposeful steps, the kind that said someone was busy and had 100 other places to be. She glanced at the door but didn't think much of it. Nurses made their rounds all the time. The door swung open and a woman in navy blue scrubs stepped inside. She looked to be in her mid-40s, with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun and tired eyes that had probably seen one too many difficult shifts. She carried a small tray with medications and wore a name badge that read, Linda Chen, RN. Linda barely glanced at Diana as she walked to the computer terminal near the bed to check Dr. Hayes' chart. She moved efficiently, like someone who'd done this same routine thousands of times. Diana watched her quietly, not wanting to disturb her work. But as Linda was updating something on the screen, she suddenly stopped and turned to look at Diana directly. Visiting hours ended 20 minutes ago, Linda said flatly. Her voice wasn't mean exactly, but it wasn't friendly either. It was the voice of someone who was too tired to add any warmth to her words. Diana looked up from her tablet, a bit surprised. Oh, I didn't realize. I have clearance to stay after hours, actually. Everyone thinks they have clearance, Linda interrupted. And now there was an edge to her voice. Everyone thinks they're the exception to the rules. But we have these policies for a reason. Patients need rest and the staff need space to do their jobs without family members hovering around. Diana felt a small flicker of frustration but pushed it down. The nurse didn't know who she was, and that wasn't her fault. I understand that, and I completely respect the hospital's policies. But in this case, look, I've had a really long day, Linda cut her off again. Her shoulders sagged a little, and Diana could see the exhaustion written all over her face. I've dealt with 3 different families today who all thought their situation was special enough to ignore the rules.
One woman literally yelled at me because I asked her to step out during a procedure.
I'm not trying to be difficult, but you need to leave. Now. There was something in Linda's voice that made Diana pause. It wasn't just tiredness. It was something deeper, like someone who'd been pushed to their absolute limit and was hanging on by a thread. Diana had heard that tone before, usually from staff members who were overworked, understaffed, and running on empty. I hear you, Diana said gently, trying a different approach. It sounds like you've had a really tough shift. I'm sorry people have been giving you a hard time, but if you could just let me explain. No, you're not listening to me, Linda said, and her voice rose slightly. A nurse passing by in the hallway glanced in through the window, curious about the raised voice. I don't care who you are or what your explanation is. The rules exist for everyone. I'm asking you nicely to please collect your things and leave. Diana took a breath. This was getting out of hand, and she really didn't want to pull rank. That wasn't how she wanted her staff to know her. She wanted them to respect her because she earned it, not because she waved her title around like a weapon. But this situation was becoming ridiculous. She reached for her purse thinking she'd show Linda her hospital ID badge and clear this whole thing up quickly. But before she could even unzip it, Linda took a step closer and her voice got firmer. "You know what, I've asked you 3 times now. I'm done being nice about this." Linda walked to the door and stuck her head out into the hallway. "Tom, could you come here for a minute?" Diana's eyebrows shot up. Was this nurse really calling security on her? This couldn't be happening. She stood up from the chair, holding up her hands in a calm gesture. "Please, let's not escalate this. If you just give me 1 second to show you my ID." "I don't need to see your ID," Linda said, turning back to face her. "What I need is for visitors to follow the rules like everyone else. You're not special just because you think you are." A security guard appeared at the door. He was young, probably in his early 20s, with a fresh face that suggested he was new to the job. Diana didn't recognize him, which meant he'd been hired in the last few weeks. Great. Just great. "What's going on?" the guard asked, looking between Linda and Diana with uncertainty. "This visitor is refusing to leave after visiting ours," Linda explained, crossing her arms. "I've asked her multiple times, and she keeps arguing with me. Can you please escort her out?" The security guard, whose badge read Tom Rodriguez, looked uncomfortable. He turned to Diana with an apologetic expression. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to come with me. We can sort this out downstairs." Diana felt a surge of disbelief wash over her. This was absurd. She was being kicked out of her own hospital by her own staff. She could end this right now just by saying who she was. But looking at Linda's exhausted face and Tom's nervous eyes, she realized something important. If she pulled rank now, she'd humiliate them both. And what would that accomplish? It would make her feel powerful for about 5 seconds, but it would make these 2 employees feel small and embarrassed. That wasn't leadership. That was just being cruel. Besides, this whole situation was actually revealing something she needed to see. How had things gotten so bad that her own security team didn't even know who she was? Why was Linda so burned out that she couldn't take 30 seconds to listen? What kind of hospital was she really running if communication had broken down this completely? "All right," Diana said quietly, putting her tablet back in her purse. "I'll leave." Linda looked surprised, like she'd expected more of a fight. "Oh, well, thank you for cooperating." Diana took one last look at Dr. Hayes, still sleeping peacefully through all of this drama. At least he was getting his rest. She walked toward the door and Tom stepped aside to let her pass. As she moved into the hallway, she could see other nurses at the station watching the scene with interest. Great. By tomorrow morning, the whole night shift would be talking about the difficult visitor who had to be removed from the cardiac unit. Linda followed them out and Diana heard her saying to another nurse, "Can you believe some people? They think the rules don't apply to them." The other nurse murmured something sympathetic, and Diana heard Linda sigh heavily. "I'm so tired. We've been short-staffed for weeks and I'm pulling another double tomorrow. I just can't deal with entitled visitors on top of everything else." Tom walked beside Diana toward the elevators, clearly uncomfortable with the whole situation. "I'm sorry about this, ma'am. If you want to come back tomorrow during regular visiting hours, I'm sure it won't be a problem." Diana nodded but didn't say anything. What could she say? That she was the hospital administrator and this was all a huge misunderstanding? That would just make everything worse. No. She'd let this play out and deal with it properly on Monday morning. As they stepped into the elevator and the doors closed, Diana caught a glimpse of Linda walking back into Dr. Hayes's room, her shoulders slumped with exhaustion. And despite everything that had just happened, despite being escorted out of her own hospital like some kind of troublemaker, Diana felt something unexpected. She felt grateful, because now she knew exactly what was wrong with Riverside Medical Center, and she knew exactly what she needed to fix first. The elevator ride down felt like the longest 90 seconds of Diana's life. Tom stood beside her, shifting his weight from foot to foot, clearly wishing he was anywhere else. The silence was thick and awkward, broken only by the soft ding as they passed each floor. "So, are you family of the patient?" Tom finally asked, trying to make conversation. Diana almost laughed. Here she was being escorted out of the building, like she'd done something wrong and this kid was trying to be polite about it. Something like that. she said simply. He's someone very important to me. I get it, Tom said, and he actually sounded sympathetic. My grandma was in the hospital last year. I wanted to stay with her all the time too. But the rules, they're pretty strict about visiting hours. They are, Diana agreed, and they should be. She'd approved those policies herself when she reviewed them last week. They were designed to protect patients and give the medical staff room to work without interference. Good rules. Important rules. The problem wasn't the rules themselves. The problem was that nobody on the night shift even knew who she was. The elevator doors opened to the main lobby, and Tom walked her all the way to the front entrance. As they passed the information desk, Diana noticed the woman behind the counter watching them with curious eyes. Tomorrow, that woman would probably be telling everyone about the visitor who got kicked out. News traveled fast in hospitals. I really am sorry about this, Tom said as they reached the automatic doors. Nothing personal, I know, Diana told him. You were just doing your job. He looked relieved that she wasn't angry at him. Have a good night, ma'am. And like I said, you can always come back tomorrow during regular hours. Diana nodded and stepped out into the cool night air. The parking lot was half empty now, and her car sat alone under one of the flickering streetlights, another thing that needed fixing, she thought. How long had that light been broken? She walked slowly to her car, not in any rush to leave. Her mind was spinning with everything that had just happened. She sat in the driver's seat but didn't start the engine. Instead, she pulled out her phone and stared at it, thinking about calling the night supervisor and clearing this whole thing up right now. But what good would that do? Linda and Tom would find out who she was and feel absolutely terrible. They'd probably be terrified they'd lose their jobs. And for what? For following the rules? For doing exactly what they were supposed to do? No. This wasn't their fault. This was a system failure. Plain and simple. And system failures needed system solutions, not individual punishments. Diana finally started her car and drove home, but her mind never left that hospital room and that exhausted nurse who'd been running on empty. Back on the 4th floor, Linda was finishing her medication rounds. Her hands moved automatically, checking doses, scanning barcodes, updating charts. She'd done this routine so many times she could practically do it in her sleep, which was good because she was so tired she felt like she was sleepwalking anyway. Her colleague, Patricia, caught up with her near the supply room. Hey, I heard what happened with that visitor. Good for you for standing your ground. Linda shrugged. I just enforce the rules. Everyone wants to be the exception, but we can't function if we let everyone do whatever they want. Exactly, Patricia agreed. Last week I had a guy who tried to bring in outside food at midnight. Can you imagine? He got all huffy when I told him no. People just don't respect that we're trying to do our jobs. They walked together down the hallway, and Linda felt a little bit of her stress melting away. At least someone understood. At least, she wasn't alone in dealing with difficult situations. How many hours are you at this week? Patricia asked. This is my 3rd double in 7 days, Linda admitted. My daughter keeps asking when I'm going to be home for dinner again. I keep telling her soon, but honestly, I don't know when that's going to happen. Patricia shook her head. It's ridiculous. We've been short-staffed since Henderson and Martinez left, and has anyone bothered to hire replacements? No. They just expect us to pick up the slack and work ourselves to death. Tell me about it. I heard there's a new administrator starting, but I haven't seen her yet. Probably sitting in her fancy office somewhere, looking at spreadsheets and having no idea what it's actually like down here. They reached the nurses' station, where 2 other nurses were charting. One of them, Kelly, looked up with interest. Are you guys talking about that visitor who got removed? I heard security had to be called. Yeah, that was on our floor, Patricia said. Linda handled it perfectly. The woman just wouldn't leave when visiting hours ended. Kelly nodded knowingly. We had someone like that last month. Argued for 20 minutes about why he should be allowed to stay. Like we don't have actual sick patients to take care of. Linda felt a little surge of validation. She'd been second-guessing herself a bit after the woman left so quietly. Maybe she'd been too harsh. But hearing her colleagues support her decision made her feel better. She'd done the right thing. She'd enforced the rules fairly, even when it was uncomfortable. You know what the real problem is? Patricia said, lowering her voice. Administration has no idea what happens on these floors at night. They make all these policies sitting in their meetings, but they're not here at 3 in the morning when we're running around with half the staff we need. Exactly, Kelly chimed in. And they wonder why patient satisfaction scores are down. Maybe if they actually staffed us properly, we'd have time to be warm and fuzzy with everyone. Linda thought about the patient satisfaction surveys she'd seen posted in the break room. Low scores across the board for the night shift. It wasn't fair. They were all working as hard as they could with what they had. But it never felt like enough. Her phone buzzed with a text from her daughter. "Mom, are you coming home tonight or working another double?" Linda's heart sank. She typed back quickly. "Home by 8 tomorrow morning. I'll make you pancakes before school, promise." 3 little dots appeared, then disappeared. No response. Her daughter was upset, and Linda didn't blame her. What kind of mother worked so much she barely saw her own kid? But what choice did she have? The hospital needed nurses, and if she didn't pick up these shifts, who would? The patients deserved good care, even if it meant sacrificing time with her family. Patricia touched her arm gently. "You okay?" "Yeah," Linda lied. "Just tired." "Aren't we all?" Patricia said with a sad smile. Meanwhile, Diana had arrived home and changed into comfortable pajamas, but sleep was the last thing on her mind. She sat at her kitchen table with her laptop open, pulling up files she'd been meaning to review for days: staffing reports, scheduling patterns, employee satisfaction surveys, budget allocations for each department. The numbers told a story she'd been too busy to really see before. The cardiac unit was running at 70% of recommended staffing levels. Nurses were averaging 55 hours per week, well above the healthy maximum. Overtime costs were through the roof, which meant the hospital was spending more money to provide worse care. It was a losing situation for everyone. She found Linda's employee file and read through it carefully. 15 years of service, multiple commendations for excellent patient care, not a single disciplinary action on record, shift after shift after shift of overtime logged in the system. This wasn't a bad nurse. This was a good nurse who'd been pushed past her breaking point. Diana closed her laptop and rubbed her tired eyes. Tomorrow was Saturday, but she wasn't going to rest. She had work to do, real work, the kind that actually mattered. Not sitting in meetings talking about problems, but fixing them. She pulled out a notebook and started making a list. Interview the night shift staff. Review the hiring process and find out why positions were staying empty for months. Check the communication systems and figure out why announcements weren't reaching everyone. Most importantly, she needed to understand the real experience of working in this hospital, not the sanitized version that appeared in official reports. Getting kicked out of her own hospital was embarrassing, sure. But it was also the wake-up call she needed. She'd been so focused on the big picture that she'd missed what was right in front of her. People were struggling, and she hadn't seen it because she wasn't looking in the right places. Monday morning was going to be very interesting. And Linda Chen had no idea that the visitor she'd removed from the hospital was about to change everything. Saturday morning came too quickly for Linda. She'd finally made it home at 8:30, exhausted and running on fumes. Her daughter Ashley was already dressed for school and eating cereal at the kitchen table. The look she gave Linda was somewhere between relief and resentment. "You said 8, Ashley said quietly. "I know, sweetie. I'm sorry. There was a last-minute emergency." It was always a last-minute emergency. There was always one more thing that needed doing, one more patient who needed help. Linda had tried to make the promised pancakes, but she was so tired she nearly fell asleep standing at the stove. Ashley had noticed and told her to just go to bed. The fact that her 14-year-old daughter was taking care of her instead of the other way around made Linda want to cry. She'd slept most of Saturday, waking up only to eat something quick before falling back asleep. Her body was screaming for rest, and she'd finally listened to it. Sunday had been a little better. She'd taken Ashley out for lunch, and they'd gone to the mall together. Normal mom things she hadn't had time for in weeks. "Mom, do you like your job?" Ashley had asked her while they were sharing French fries at the food court. The question had caught Linda off guard. "Of course I do. Why do you ask?" Ashley had shrugged, dipping a fry in ketchup. "I don't know. You just always seem so tired and stressed, and you're never home anymore." Linda hadn't known what to say to that. How do you explain to your kid that you're exhausted because you care too much, that you pick up extra shifts because if you don't, patients might not get the care they need, that you're stressed because you're trying to do the work of 3 people with the energy of half a person? "It's just a busy time right now," she'd said instead. "It'll get better." But would it? She wasn't so sure anymore. Sunday evening, Patricia had texted her. "Did you hear? New administrator is starting to make changes already. Called an emergency meeting with all department heads for Monday morning." Linda had stared at her phone, feeling a mix of hope and skepticism. How many times had they heard about new initiatives and changes? How many times had administration promised things would get better, only for nothing to actually change? "Let me guess," Linda had texted back. "Another committee to study the problem?" Probably. But hey, at least someone's pretending to care, right? That was the sad truth of it. After 15 years at Riverside Medical Center, Linda had learned not to get her hopes up when it came to management. They'd talk about employee wellness and work-life balance in meetings, then turn around and ask you to work another double shift. They'd send out surveys asking what staff needed, then ignore all the responses. It was exhausting in a completely different way than the physical exhaustion of patient care. Monday morning arrived with gray skies and the promise of rain. Diana was at her office by 6:30, which was early even for her. She'd spent the entire weekend preparing for today, and she had a clear plan in mind. At 7, her assistant knocked on the door. "Morning, Diana, you're here early." "Couldn't sleep," Diana admitted. "Too much on my mind." "Is everything set up for the 8 o'clock meeting?" "Conference room is ready. All department heads confirmed they'll be there." "Good. And did you send out those individual meeting requests like I asked?" Her assistant nodded, but she looked curious. "I did, though I have to say it's an unusual list. Security staff, night shift nurses, maintenance workers. That's not the usual crowd you'd meet with on your 3rd week." "Maybe that's been the problem," Diana said. "We keep meeting with the usual crowd and wondering why nothing changes." The 8 o'clock meeting with department heads went exactly as Diana expected. She asked pointed questions about staffing levels, hiring delays, and communication breakdowns. Some of them had good answers. Most of them had excuses. But by the end of the meeting, they all understood that things were going to be different moving forward. "I need actual solutions on my desk by Wednesday," Diana told them. "Not proposals to study the problem. Not committees to explore options. Real actionable solutions that we can implement immediately. Are we clear?" They were clear. After they left, Diana met with the head of human resources. They went through the hiring pipeline together, identifying bottlenecks and unnecessary delays. Apparently, it was taking an average of 90 days to fill nursing positions. 90 days. No wonder the floors were understaffed. "Why so long?" Diana asked. "Well, there's the initial screening, then the first interview, then the second interview, then the background check, then the... Can we do the background check at the same time as the interviews?" The HR director blinked. "I suppose we could. And do we really need 2 separate interviews? That's how we've always done it." "That's not an answer," Diana said firmly. "I need you to streamline this process. I want qualified candidates hired within 30 days, not 90. Figure out how to make that happen." Next, she met with Tom from security. The poor kid looked terrified to be sitting in the administrator's office. Diana put him at ease quickly, asking him about his training and orientation process. "Did you attend the all-staff meeting 2 weeks ago where I was introduced?" she asked. "No, ma'am. I started 3 weeks ago and my training was during the day. I work nights now, so I missed that meeting." "Did anyone show you my photo or tell you who I was?" Tom shook his head. "I got an email with the announcement, but honestly, I get so many emails. I probably didn't read it carefully." Diana made more notes. The communication problem was even worse than she'd thought. By lunchtime, she'd met with 6 different people, and a clear picture had emerged. The night shift staff felt completely disconnected from hospital leadership. They never saw administrators. They never got included in important meetings. They felt like second-class employees, invisible and undervalued. At 2 o'clock, Diana's assistant knocked on her door again. "Linda Chen is here for her 2:30 appointment." Diana's heart started beating a little faster. This was the meeting she'd been both dreading and looking forward to. "Give me 5 minutes, then send her in." She used those 5 minutes to look over Linda's file one more time. 15 years of exemplary service, a single mother raising a teenager, consistently working overtime to cover staffing shortages. This wasn't someone who deserved to be punished. This was someone who deserved recognition and support. When Linda walked into the office, Diana was sitting behind her desk reviewing a document. Linda stepped inside hesitantly, and Diana looked up with a professional smile. "Hi, Linda, thank you for coming. Please have a seat." Linda sat down in the chair across from the desk, looking a bit confused. She seemed to be trying to place Diana's face like she recognized her from somewhere but couldn't quite figure out where. "I'm Diana Warren, the new hospital administrator," Diana said, watching Linda's face carefully. "Nice to meet you," Linda said politely. "I have to admit, I'm not sure why I'm here. Your assistant just said you wanted to meet with me, but she didn't say what it was about." "I'm meeting with several staff members today," Diana explained. "Getting to know people, understanding what's happening on the floors, that sort of thing." Linda relaxed slightly. "Oh, okay, that makes sense." Diana leaned back in her chair, still watching Linda. The nurse still hadn't recognized her. The woman who'd stood in that hospital room under fluorescent lights looked very different from the woman sitting in this professional office setting, with her hair styled, makeup done, and wearing a tailored suit. "I wanted to ask you about Friday night," Diana said carefully. Linda's brow furrowed. "Friday night? What about it?" "I understand there was an incident with a visitor in the cardiac unit. A visitor who was asked to leave after visiting hours." The color drained from Linda's face as realization started to dawn. Her eyes widened and she stared at Diana with growing horror. "Oh my God," she whispered. Diana remained quiet, letting Linda process what was happening. "That was you," Linda said, her voice barely audible. "The woman in Dr. Hayes's room, that was you." "It was." Linda looked like she might be sick. "I am so sorry. I had no idea. I didn't recognize you. I would never have." She stopped, pressing her hand to her mouth. "Oh my God. I called security on you. I had you removed from the hospital." "Your hospital." "You did," Diana confirmed. Tears started forming in Linda's eyes. "I'm going to lose my job, aren't I? After 15 years, I'm going to get fired because I didn't recognize the new administrator." Her voice cracked. "My daughter. How am I going to tell my daughter?" Diana held up her hand. "Linda, stop, take a breath. You're not losing your job." Linda stared at her, confused. "I'm not?" "No," Diana said firmly. "You're not. In fact, we need to talk about what happened Friday night. But probably not for the reasons you think." Linda sat frozen in her chair, her mind racing through a dozen worst-case scenarios. She'd kicked her boss out of the hospital, her own boss, the woman who could fire her with a single signature. 15 years of dedicated service gone in an instant because she'd been too tired and stressed to take a moment to listen. "I don't understand," Linda finally managed to say. "If I'm not getting fired, then why am I here?" Diana stood up from behind her desk and moved to the chair beside Linda instead of staying behind the barrier of authority. She sat down, and her whole posture changed from administrator to simply another person having a conversation. "Because what happened Friday night showed me something I desperately needed to see," Diana said. "And I want to thank you for that." Linda's mouth fell open. "Thank me? For having you thrown out?" "For showing me the truth about what's happening in this hospital," Diana said. "Linda, I've spent the last 2 weeks in meetings, looking at reports, reviewing budgets. All very important stuff, but it didn't tell me what I really needed to know. Friday night told me everything." Linda still looked confused and terrified, so Diana continued. "You enforce the rules because that's your job. You did exactly what you were supposed to do. But the fact that you didn't know who I was, that security, didn't know who I was, that tells me our communication is completely broken. The fact that you were so exhausted you couldn't take 30 seconds to hear me out, that tells me our staffing situation is a crisis. The fact that you're working your 3rd double shift in a week, that tells me we're asking impossible things from our people." Linda's eyes started to fill with tears again, but for a different reason this time. "You noticed all that?" "I did." and I've spent the entire weekend and this morning digging into the numbers. Linda, you and your colleagues are being set up to fail. We're asking you to do the impossible with half the resources you need, and then wondering why patient satisfaction scores are low and staff morale is in the basement. It's been really hard, Linda admitted, her voice breaking. I love nursing. I love helping people. But lately I go home and I just cry because I feel like I'm failing everyone. My patients, my colleagues, my daughter. No matter how hard I work, it's never enough. Diana's heart ached hearing this. This was exactly the problem she'd inherited. And it stopped today. That ends now. I'm implementing immediate changes and I want you to be part of the solution. Me? Linda looked shocked. You. You've been on the front lines for 15 years. You know what works and what doesn't. You know what nurses actually need, not what administrators think they need. I want your input, and I want the input of your colleagues. Diana pulled out a folder from her desk. I've already started the process of hiring 6 new nurses for the cardiac unit. We're streamlining our hiring procedures so it takes 30 days instead of 90. That means relief is coming soon, not months from now. Linda's hand went to her chest. 6 nurses? That would change everything. I'm also implementing mandatory limits on consecutive shifts. No more working 3 doubles in a week. I don't care how short-staffed we are, we'll figure something else out. Because burnt-out nurses make mistakes and I won't risk patient safety or your well-being for the sake of saving money. The board is going to push back on that, Linda said quietly. Let them, Diana said firmly. I'll handle the board. That's my job. Your job is to take care of patients, and you can't do that if you're running on empty. For the first time since walking into the office, Linda smiled a little. You're different from the last administrator. I hope so. Because clearly what we were doing before wasn't working. Diana leaned forward. Linda, I need to ask you something. Would you be willing to help me understand what the night shift really needs? Not in a formal committee or anything like that. Just honest conversations about what would actually make your job better? Linda nodded slowly. Yeah, I'd like that. Good. Because I'm also starting something new. Once a month, I'm going to work a shift alongside the staff. Different department each time. I want to see what you see. Experience what you experience. I can't fix problems I don't understand. Linda looked genuinely impressed. I've never heard of an administrator doing that. Maybe that's been the problem, Diana said. We sit in offices looking at numbers and forget that those numbers represent real people. People who are exhausted and overwhelmed and just trying their best. They talked for another 20 minutes. Linda opened up about the challenges of the night shift, the equipment that didn't work properly, the supply shortages, the feeling of being invisible to hospital leadership. Diana took notes and asked questions, really listening in a way Linda hadn't experienced from administration in years. When Linda finally left the office, she felt lighter than she had in months, maybe even years. For the first time in a long time, she felt hope that things might actually change. Over the next few weeks, Diana kept her promises. The new nurses were hired and started their orientation. Shift limits were put in place. Diana showed up on the cardiac unit one Tuesday night at 11 p.m., wearing scrubs and ready to work alongside the staff. Linda had been skeptical that she'd actually follow through, but there she was, helping, with patient care, seeing firsthand what the night shift dealt with. That call light has been broken for 3 weeks, Linda mentioned, pointing to a room where the light wouldn't turn off. Diana made a note. Maintenance will fix it tomorrow, and I'm going to find out why it took 3 weeks for anyone to address it. She did, and it got fixed, and so did a dozen other small things that had been ignored for months. The story of Diana being kicked out of her own hospital by Linda became legend at Riverside Medical Center. But Diana never let it be told as a humiliation story. Instead, she told it at staff meetings as an example of broken systems, not broken people. Linda Chen did her job perfectly that night, Diana would say. She enforced our policies and protected her patient. The failure wasn't hers. It was ours as a leadership team for not communicating better, for not supporting our staff better, for not being present enough to be recognized. Linda became one of Diana's strongest advocates. When other nurses complained about new policies or changes, Linda would tell them, "Give her a chance. She actually listens. She actually cares." 6 months later, the hospital's staff satisfaction scores had improved dramatically. Patient care scores followed. The emergency room wait times decreased. Nurses stopped leaving for other hospitals. People started wanting to work at Riverside again. Diana was in her office late one evening when Linda knocked on the door. She was just starting her shift and had stopped by to drop off the monthly feedback report that Diana had asked the night shift to put together. "How's Ashley?" Diana asked. She'd made a point to ask about Linda's daughter whenever they talked. "She's good, really good actually. I was home for dinner 4 nights last week. She said it feels like she has her mom back." Linda's eyes got a little watery. "Thank you for that." "You don't have to thank me for treating you like a human being," Diana said. "That should be the baseline, not something special." Linda smiled. "Well, it is special, at least around here." She turned to leave, then paused. "You know what's funny? I used to dread coming to work. Every shift felt like going into battle, but now I actually look forward to it again. I remembered why I became a nurse in the first place." After Linda left, Diana sat at her desk thinking about that first night. Getting kicked out of her own hospital had been embarrassing and frustrating in the moment, but it had also been the best thing that could have happened. It had shown her the truth, not the sanitized version in reports and meetings, but the real messy, exhausting truth of what her people were dealing with every single day. Sometimes the best leaders aren't the ones who never make mistakes or never face humiliation. Sometimes the best leaders are the ones who are willing to learn from uncomfortable moments, who choose understanding over ego, who see problems as opportunities to do better. Diana had learned that lesson in the most unexpected way, thanks to an exhausted nurse who was just trying to do her job, and a security guard who was following the rules. And Riverside Medical Center was better for it. She looked at the photo on her desk of Dr. Hayes, who'd been released from the hospital 2 weeks after that fateful night. He'd heard the whole story and had laughed until he cried. "Getting kicked out of your own hospital," he'd said, shaking his head. "That's the best medical education you've gotten in years." He was right. And Diana wouldn't have changed a thing.